Hello, everybody. Welcome to Church History Insights and Questions. My name is David Eaton. This is the third part of a four-part series on Emma Hale Smith Bidamon, a remarkable woman, a fascinating character. If you didn't catch parts 1 and 2, please go back to our Church History Insights and Questions YouTube channel, and you can pick up on them there. Part 3, again, it uses a lot of source references. These are some of the books, these are some of the histories that have been written, mostly about Joseph Smith, but of course they include information about his wife Emma. You've got Ganesh Cherians there, you've got George Buchanan, Lucy Mack Smith, Richard Lyman Bushman, John Turner, Fulton Brodie, Dan Vogel, Benjamin Park. This is one I haven't put in before, but it's Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's House Full of Females. It's a history of Joseph Smith, but it particularly focuses on the plural marriage and women's rights in early Mormonism, 1835 to 1870. And then in addition, you've got books that focus more onto Emma Hale Smith, from Paul Thomas Smith, Jennifer Reeder, Susan Easton Black, and Linda Newell and Verlene Tibbetts Avery. There are lots of other books and other sources that we can look at, and to try to get a picture of a more accurate picture of this remarkable lady. So a quick recap of the timeline of part 2, and as I said earlier, if you haven't had a chance to see that, please go back to the YouTube channel and pick it up there. August 1830, she left Harmony, Pennsylvania, with her husband Joseph Smith, but she's leaving her home for the last time and moving to Fayette. She never saw her parents again. I always come back to this because it sort of sounds and feels so heartrending to have to do that. February 1831, they moved to Newell K. Whitney's store in Kirtland. July 1834, Emma reads in the Chardon Spectator that Joseph is dead. This is a reference to Zion's camp. And the Chardon Spectator, a local newspaper, announces that Joseph Smith had been shot in the leg, that his leg had to be amputated, and that he had died. And Emma had to deal with that only for 2 or 3 weeks, and then he returned and she discovered that he hadn't died. 1836, temple workers take the beds, and Emma, Joseph, and his parents take the floor. Emma gives guided tours of the mummies in Kirtland in 1836. And again, 27th of March 1836, deprived of attending washing of feet, Emma tells the women, don't complain. These things happen. December 1838, Emma stays 2 nights with Joseph in Liberty Jail. February 1839, with 4 children and church papers under her skirts, Emma crosses the frozen Mississippi River. And there's a brief stay elsewhere, but then they move to Commerce, which is later Nauvoo, Hancock County, Illinois, on the 10th of May, 1839. This is according to Mary Audentia Smith Anderson, the Memoirs of President Joseph Smith. Now, Emma is renowned for her fondness for and skill with horses. Of Emma's fondness for horses, one woman wrote, this is Emmeline B. Wells, she wrote, quote, "She could manage them well in riding or driving." That's not driving as we as we understand it. It's the buggies and the carts that they drive. Many can recall seeing her mounted on horseback beside her husband on military parade, and a grander couple could nowhere be found. She always dressed becomingly, and a riding costume showed off her shapely figure to the best advantage. Close quote. In March of 1842, on the 17th of March, this is very well known, and obviously everybody knows about this, that she is appointed or called to, ordained to. Some of the references refer to ordination, but it's a different kind of ordination. President of Relief Society. Quote, "Emma is called as the president of the Female Relief Society of Nauvoo. Almost certainly, Emma was not aware that both her secretary, Eliza R. Snow, and her counselor, Sarah Cleveland, in the Relief Society had become Joseph's plural wives. Later, in May 1843, her treasurer, Elvira Holmes, would also become one of Joseph's wives, close quote. This is a quote from Linda Newell and Verlene Tippett Avery's book. So this introduces to us the controversial and well-known doctrine and practice that that the church is really known for, was known for in those early years, the practice of celestial marriage, sealing of women to other men, and which is known as plural marriage, and all of its sort of shenanigans. It's an interesting period of time in the church, and it's a terrible time, or the beginning of a terrible time, really, for Emma, whose knowledge and understanding of exactly what went on, is questionable, and who ultimately became a fierce and vigorous opponent of the practice. So yes, it's a severe trauma for Emma, as this slide depicts her confronting her husband. Quote, "Joseph kept his relationship with Louisa Bidamon." Now, Louisa Bidamon is thought to be the first plural wife in Nauvoo, although there are disputes about that as to whether she was actually the first or there was one before. And that doesn't take into account discussions and debates that continue about Fanny Alger, and that was thought to have taken place some years previously in Kirtland. But going back to this quote, Joseph kept his relationship with Louisa Bidamon secret from all but a select few. He also kept it secret from Emma. His earlier attempts to begin the practice in Kirtland, would be a reference to Fanny Alger, had presented severe trauma for Emma, and Joseph knew that she would not willingly share him with another woman. Emma would eventually know about some of Joseph's plural wives. Her knowledge of 7 can be documented conclusively, and some evidence hints that she may have known of others, close quote. Emma, who had not been taught the doctrine, seemed oblivious to the code words Joseph and others used to refer to plural celestial marriage and deny imputations of immoral behavior, another close quote. So this is more from Linda Newell and Verlene Tibbetts-Avery's book, Mormon Enigma. Excuse me. And so it's more information about, or their understanding, and borne out by most other scholars who have researched and looked into this whole subject of plural marriage. It's their understanding that Emma will have known about some of these wives that Joseph had taken, but not very many. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we go on here. Yes, here in fact is another slide on that subject, and this is coming from Rough Stone Rolling by Richard Lyman Bushman. But we should preface that by saying with imprecise records, estimates over time from contemporary sources to much later ones puts the number of Joseph's plural wives, depending on which sources you look at, from as few as 3 to as many as 73, with modern scholarly consensus around 35 to 40. Richard L. Bushman says that 10 of Joseph's wives were under 20 years old. This can be seen on the graph here. The left-hand axis is the age of women at the time of marrying Joseph, and the horizontal axis or line at the bottom is the age that Joseph was at the time of marrying a woman. And I did count them up, but there are about 10 or so that appear to be in that area of 20 or under 20 years old, 10 or so. Yeah, so we should just pause here for a moment and make it clear that not everybody, not all members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and possibly other churches as well, not everybody believes in the official narrative of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that Joseph Smith was the one who introduced plural marriage into Nauvoo society. There are some members of the church who are pretty convinced that this was something that Brigham Young introduced, and that some of the records, this is part of their assertions, that some of the records were altered a little bit. Others have suggested that this is somewhat conspiratorial, and I think it is the case that the majority of LDS scholars, and also some who are not LDS scholars, John G. Turner, for example, not an LDS scholar, but he, having done a huge amount of research for his book, The Rise and Fall of an American Prophet, Joseph Smith, his conclusion is without really any doubt that it was Joseph Smith, and that is the consensus amongst LDS scholars. But it would be wrong to suggest that narrative is accepted by everybody, in the church, or in and out of the church. It would be probably wrong to say that or to imply that. Moving on, Emma goes to see the Illinois governor in an attempt to fight Missourian extradition orders. Emma took Eliza R. Snow and Amanda Barnes Smith with her to see Illinois Governor Thomas Carlin in July 1842. Emma managed to secure the governor's statement that he would use full legal means to protect the Mormons. Subsequent to this visit, Emma wrote 2 letters and spearheaded a petition to the governor containing over 1,000 signatures from women in the Relief Society, which included assertions to the governor that Joseph was not participating in plural marriage. Many of the signatories were already married to Joseph. This is taken from a combination of a biographical sketch of Amanda Barnes Smith. And she states, President Joseph Smith wished the ladies to make the effort themselves and himself named the sisters who were to be the bearers of the petition. And it also comes from Mormon Enigma as well. When it says many of the signatories, that's still a very, very small proportion of the 1,000 signatories that are mentioned. I think it might be sort of fair to say that a few of the signatories were already married to Joseph. Emma runs the businesses because Joseph attempts to avoid imprisonment, forced him to be absent. Many of the family business duties fell to Emma. On September the 23rd, 1842, for example, Emma sold $343.30 worth of goods from the family red brick store. She writes to Sidney Rigdon, who runs the post office, complaining that all and sundry have access to Joseph's private mail. Rigdon replies that he only shows it to people who ask to see it, close quote. I think that's particularly amusing. If this is true, it's particularly amusing response from Rigdon. I only show it to people who ask. I think that's quite funny. Emma gets sick and is baptized twice. In September 1842, Emma falls ill, and there are concerns that she might not recover. Joseph watches over her every day through into October. His journal records that she was baptized twice in the river for healing. Although her health improved somewhat, it seesawed over a period of 4 months. So this is a practice that was prevalent in the early days of the church. If you fell ill, you could go to the priesthood and they would perform a baptism, a healing baptism, not a baptism to enter the church, not a baptism to forgiveness of sins or anything of that kind. It was purely a healing baptism, and that carried on for many years, many decades. But eventually, it was a stop was put to it by priesthood leaders. Question here, did Emma push Eliza down the stairs? Well, the Eliza in question is the lady on the right, Eliza R. Snow, Roxy Snow. That picture is taken around about 1850. And the story is one that circulated at the time and particularly later in Utah. The story that once Emma had discovered that her husband Joseph had in fact married Eliza, who was one of her very close friends and her treasurer in the Relief Society. She felt humiliated and severely wronged, and the story goes that she I think at the time Eliza may have been staying at the mansion house with Emma, and so the story goes that she pushed her down the stairs, and from Eliza, yeah, so we'll pick that up. Quote, whether Eliza fell down the stairs or whether Emma pushed her or pulled her down by the hair, or whether Emma only turned her out of the house, the result seems to be documented in Eliza's terse journal entry for February the 11th, 1843, in which she wrote, quote, took board and had my lodgings removed to brother Jonathan Holmes, close quote. Brian Hales in his work, he says this, quote, concerning the tantalizing stories of conflict between the two women, many problems and questions exist. A review of available manuscript documents leads to the conclusion that folklore predominates where historical evidence is unavailable. So this is a question that we are not going to get an answer to. We don't know. It is not possible to say with any authority that Emma did push Eliza down the stairs. It is probably true that that she was very, very upset and very disappointed to discover what she did discover about Eliza's marriage to her husband Joseph. So picking up this narrative of the introduction of plural marriage in the Nauvoo period, it clearly caused severe trauma for Emma. The historical record does suggest that from time to time she warmed to the idea, and there were times when she seemed to be more approving of the idea, but there were other times when she was very resistant to the idea. Emma's intransigence regarding polygamy prevented all women from receiving the endowment. This has taken us to the spring of 1843. Quote, after being involved in the construction and design of the garments, the building of the temple, and hearing about their place in the endowment in Relief Society, why had women not yet been admitted to the endowment council? Joseph taught that a man must obey God to be worthy of the endowment, and that a wife must obey a righteous husband to merit the same reward. Until Emma could be obedient to Joseph and give him plural wives, she could not participate in endowment ceremonies. Joseph wanted Emma to serve as the example, the elect lady, the disseminator of the endowment blessing to other women. Thus, her rejection of plural marriage would have blocked her admittance into the endowment council because she had not obeyed her husband and therefore prevented other women from entering as well, close quote. So this is the view of Newell and Tippett in their book, and it is the view of other historians that Emma's challenges and problems with what Joseph was doing would have put or was a stumbling block, not only to her receiving her endowment, but it would have been a break on the other women receiving their endowments. Here's an example of what we were talking about earlier, that Emma sort of came in and out of approving of the practice of plural marriage. In early May this is picked up from the Church's Saints book. Quote, in early May 1843, Emma took Emily and Eliza Partridge aside and explained the principle of plural marriage to them. She had told Joseph that she would consent to him being sealed to 2 additional wives as long as she could choose them. And she had chosen Emily and Eliza, apparently unaware that Joseph had already been sealed to them, close quote. So again, this is another very well-known, famous story. And again, it's heartrending because she would not have been aware that Joseph had already been sealed to Emily and Eliza Partridge. And so Emma was probably acting in good faith, thinking that she was, being helpful. But at the time, she didn't know that Joseph had already been sealed to them. This is a quote again from Mormon Enigma. It says, Emma had made the sacrifice, and within 5 days, she had her reward. On a cold, rainy day, May 28th, 1843, Emma was sealed to Joseph for time and all eternity. On this same day, she was the first woman admitted to the prayer circle. Joseph would initiate her into the endowment sometime before the early autumn of that year. So this kind of brings us to the revelation. And again, it's hugely well known. Everybody is aware of the revelation. We find it in Doctrine and Covenants section 132 in our books today. And this sort of leads up to this, how did this revelation come? Well, the church narrative is that this is how the revelation appeared. Emma's resistance to plural marriage prompted Hyrum to encourage Joseph to dictate a written revelation on the subject. William Clayton, he's the gentleman with the beard on the sort of under chin beard on the left, and he was one of Joseph Smith's clerks or scribes, and he features heavily in this story. He was a fastidious journal keeper, and he would go after every day. He would go and write in his journal from the notes that he had taken during the day. And sometimes he would write up the journal later as well, sometimes weeks and sometimes months later. And this is his recollection. Quote, on the morning of the 12th of July, 1843, Joseph and Hyrum Smith came into the office in the upper story of the brick store on the bank of the Mississippi River. They were talking on the subject of plural marriage. Hyrum said to Joseph, if you will write the revelation on celestial marriage, I will take and read it to Emma, and I believe I can convince her of its truth, and you will hereafter have peace. Joseph smiled and remarked, you do not know Emma as well as I do. Hyrum repeated his opinion and further remarked, the doctrine is so plain, I can convince any reasonable man or woman of its truth, purity, and heavenly origin, or words to that effect. Joseph then said, well, I will write the revelation and we will see. He then requested me to get paper and prepare to write. Hyrum very urgently requested Joseph to write the revelation by means of the Urim and Thummim. But Joseph, in reply, said he did not need to, for he knew the revelation perfectly from beginning to end. Joseph and Hyrum then sat down, and Joseph commenced to dictate the revelation on celestial marriage, and I wrote it, sentence by sentence, as he dictated. After the whole was written, Joseph asked me to read it through, slowly and carefully, which I did, and he pronounced it correct. He then remarked that there was much more that he could write on the same subject, but what was written was sufficient for the present. Hyrum then took the revelation to read to Emma. Joseph remained with me in the office until Hyrum returned. When he came back, Joseph asked him how he had succeeded. Hyrum replied that he had never received a more severe talking to in his life, that Emma was very bitter and full of resentment and anger. Joseph quietly remarked, "I told you, you did not know Emma as well as I did." Joseph then put the revelation in his pocket, and they both left the office. According to Clayton, Emma did not believe a word of it and appeared very rebellious. Later, either she or Joseph burned the revelation. Now, William Clayton is a very interesting character, quite sort of pivotal in this story. And I mentioned earlier that some members of the church do not believe that Joseph Smith introduced plural marriage, and they often will refer to Clayton's journals, and they have a suspicion that those journals may have been altered or may have been affected in some way. They certainly would believe that the narrative is not as straightforward as the church is putting its weight behind. But as I said earlier, I think it is clear that the consensus of scholarly opinion is falling behind the church's narrative on this subject, in that they do believe that Joseph Smith did introduce the practice of plural marriage. And kind of following on a little bit from that subject, this is a quotation from Helen Mar Kimball Whitney. Helen Mar Kimball, as you probably know, was the youngest of all of the wives that it is alleged that Joseph Smith married. She was, I think, a month shy of her 15th year, so she was 14 at the time. And this is a quote that she wrote in 1882, and so obviously this is, donkey's years later, and she's, a lot older, and she's looking back at what happened. And she is, in fact, the most prolific author that the church has access to. She wrote a lot about the subject. And this is one quote from her book, Plural Marriage as Taught by the Prophet Joseph Smith. Quote, "Brigham was no more the author of Plural Marriage than was Mr. Spaulding the author of the Book of Mormon. The first copy of the Revelation upon Celestial Marriage was in Bishop N.K. Whitney's possession when Emma Smith demanded it, but he was too much of a practical and businesslike man to neglect to retain an exact copy of the original, which she destroyed as soon as it came into her possession. She thought that this act would put an end to the practice, but she was disappointed in her wicked idea." Close quote. So you're going to have two different opinions expressed. This is Helen Mar Kimball's opinion. She claims that she was a wife of Joseph Smith. She writes extensively about it, and often defending the practice and saying that although it was extremely difficult at first, it ended up, in her words, being a blessing. In fact, I think we've got this quote here. "I did not try to conceal the fact of its having been a trial, but confess that it had been one of the severest of my life, but that it had also proven one of the greatest of blessings. I could truly say it had done the most towards making me a saint and a free woman in every sense of the word. And I knew many others who could say the same, and to whom it had proven one of the greatest boons, a blessing in disguise, close quote. And that quote comes a couple of years after the first one in 1884. So, as I mentioned earlier, the topic of plural marriage is a controversial one. It's a very emotive one. Some beautiful writings have written about the impact of plural marriage upon the wives, both in a very negative sense and in some cases in a positive sense. As I mentioned, not everybody believes that it started in the way that others do believe it started with the prophet Joseph Smith. So it's something that will we ever know exactly what happened? Pretty unlikely, because the contemporary sources are simply not there. The orthodox and official narrative reason for that is that because it was secret, or it was kept out. People did not openly admit to participating in plural marriage. They were asked to keep it confidential. So it's very difficult to precisely know exactly what happened, to whom and when. But all of the documentary evidence, and there is quite a lot of it, points to the view that Joseph Smith was the author of plural marriage. The second anointing, this special priesthood ordinance was first administered on the 28th of September 1843 to Joseph and Emma Smith. During the next 5 months, this higher priesthood ordinance of the second anointing was conferred upon at least 20 men and the wives of 16 of these men, close quotes taken from David Berger's dialogue article, The Fullness of the Priesthood. I mentioned John Turner. He's a non-member historian, and he talks about the second anointing in his book. In fact, almost all of the historians talk about second anointing without going into detail of exactly what happens in that ordinance. It was an ordinance that began in Nauvoo, carried on after Joseph's death, carried on into Utah, and all the way through the 19th century and into the 20th century, and indeed into the 21st century. It's an ordinance that appears to continue, although probably not in quite the same numbers as took place in the 19th century. I think by the middle of the 19th century, some 5,000 people had already received their second anointing. The D word. Did the D word come up? No matter its origin, she opposed the doctrine. This is a quote from, again, from Mormon Enigma. No matter its origin, she opposed the doctrine. She was not without power in the struggle with Joseph over it. 4 days after her return from St. Louis, where she had gone to transact business on behalf of Joseph, Emma exerted her strongest leverage. She threatened divorce. In the most serious crisis of their marriage, Joseph backed down. He told Emma he would give up his wives, but he confided to Clayton that he did not intend to keep his word. That's the view of Linda Newell and Verleen Avery. According to Richard L. Bushman, quote, Joseph did not take any more wives after Fanny Murray, Brigham Young's 56-year-old sister, in November 1843. He had told William Clayton that Emma would divorce him if he did. So it would appear that things came to a head and Emma threatened divorce. And as we know, history pans out that that did not take place. Expansion at the Nauvoo mansion. This is a photograph of Joseph Smith and Emma Smith's mansion at Nauvoo. Not sure exactly when it was taken, but I would guess it was early 20th century photograph. Expansion of the Nauvoo mansion, completion of the new addition to her home, the Nauvoo mansion in August 1843, offered Emma a diversion from the problems we've been discussing. The new wing increased the size of Emma's home to 17 or 18 rooms. A commodious brick stable could house 75 horses, along with tack and hay. And dinners of 50 and 100 couples are part of the narrative story of Joseph and Emma's Nauvoo experience. Joseph and Emma, it would seem, delighted in entertaining folks from the town of Nauvoo, the city of Nauvoo. And that's significant numbers, catering for 50 and 100 couples. And so that is a very significant thing to do. And apparently the narrative indicates that that happened a lot. Here's a question. Did Emma poison Joseph? In a 7th of October, 1866, semi-annual conference address, Brigham Young, the president and prophet of the church at that time, described a secret council at which Joseph claimed that Emma tried to poison Joseph on 2 occasions. Brigham Young had made references to this in 2 previous addresses, 25th of February 1855 and the 7th of October 1863. And you can read those in the church archives, the Brigham Young papers. Apparently, Joseph believed at the time that Emma poisoned him. But strong evidence suggests that his self-diagnosis was mistaken and therefore was his accusation of Emma. Circulation of poisoning stories gave rise to apprehension and suspicion directed toward Emma, close quote. And that's again the view of coming from the Mormon Enigma book. And it's certainly the case that these sort of rumors circulated in and around Utah for many, many years and will have probably contributed to the very negative views that many, many church members and leaders held towards Emma Smith. They were pretty angry that Emma Smith never came west with them. We'll cover that in the 4th part of this series. We'll go and look at that in a bit more detail. But these other rumors of her poisoning Joseph were adding to the general disapproval that emanated out of Utah towards Emma Smith. Richard Bushman writes in Rough Stone Rolling, quote, During Sunday dinner on November the 5th, 1843, Joseph became ill, rushed to the door and vomited so violently that he dislocated his jaw. Every symptom of poison, Willard Richards noted in Joseph's diary. Bushman adds, quote, though there probably was an argument, the poisoning accusation was unfounded. Joseph was susceptible to vomiting anyway. He had even dislocated his jaw while vomiting once before, and 5 weeks after the 1843 dinner episode, he was sick again, vomiting more violently than ever. During this last bout, Joseph said gratefully, my wife waited on me, close quote. So Richard Bushman comes to the view that Joseph was not, that Emma did not try to poison Joseph. Will we ever know for certain? Probably not. In A Voice of Innocence from Nauvoo. So we mentioned earlier that plural marriage affected Emma significantly, traumatically sometimes, at other times not quite so heavily. But ultimately, she worked with William Wines Phelps, W.W. Phelps, and wrote this A Voice of Innocence from Nauvoo. And this was, let me just read this quote here, in defense of slander against Hyrum Smith by Orison F. Bostwick, written by W.W. Phelps, but championed by Emma, A Voice of Innocence from Nauvoo railed against all forms of debauchery and called on all Nauvoo citizens, particularly the women of the Relief Society, to stand for virtue and reject all immorality, close quote. You can see a sort of rather faint picture of the actual document that W.W. Phelps wrote at the time. And you also see the picture there of Emma standing in Relief Society, and she's delivering the, she's reading A Voice of Innocence from Nauvoo to the sisters. And there is a picture there of, which I think depicts Joseph, and he's looking a little apprehensive at what his wife is saying. And the stories do go that A Voice of Innocence contributed to the difficulties that Joseph found himself in at that time. Relief Society actually closed, so it began on March the 17th, 1842, and the last recorded meeting of the Relief Society in Nauvoo was held on March the 16th, 1844, so almost exactly 2 years later. John Taylor said, quote, the reason why the Relief Society did not continue from the first organization was that Emma Smith, the president, taught the sisters that the principle of celestial marriage, as taught and practiced by Joseph Smith, was not of God. How accurate that assertion is from John Taylor, that was the reason the Relief Society did not continue, is difficult to fully determine. And his reference to celestial marriage might be a veiled reference to plural marriage, because as we know, the section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, the first half of it talks about celestial marriage, and the second half talks about plural marriage. This brings us pretty much up to the end of the sort of Nauvoo period with Joseph Smith. So we're now leading up to his death, 24th or 27th of June, 1844. And just reading from Saints, quote later. Okay, so we should give a bit of background here. Joseph is kind of very aware that the Missourians are after him, and by that time the governor of Illinois has sort of decreed that Joseph should be arrested, and so he's kind of going into hiding here and going into hiding there a little bit, and he and Hyrum have gone across the river, and Emma, so picking up this quote here, it says, later that morning, June the 23rd, 1844, Emma sent Hyrum Kimball and her nephew Lorenzo Wasson to Iowa to convince Joseph to come home and turn himself in. They told Joseph that the governor intended to occupy Nauvoo with troops until he and his brother Hyrum gave themselves up. Porter Rockwell returned soon after with Reynolds Cahoon and a letter from Emma, again begging him to return to the city. Hyrum Kimball, Lorenzo, and Reynolds all called Joseph a coward for leaving Nauvoo and exposing the saints to danger. So this was a febrile time, very tense, very everybody very nervous about what is going to happen. Are they going to be attacked like they were in Missouri? Is everybody going to get slaughtered by the troops? And so, yeah, so sentiment is rising high, or riding high, and Joseph Smith is accused of being a coward. And then in Mormon Enigma again, Newell and Avery write, through strange twists in the writing of history, it would be Emma and not Reynolds Cahoon and Hyrum Kimball who would bear the blame for bringing Joseph back. So here's another strand of the weave that is running through Utah particularly, that not only is the rumor that Emma poisoned Joseph, but the belief is that Emma was the one who insisted that Joseph return and come back. And had she, the story goes that had she not done that, Joseph would still be alive and leading the church. And so there's a lot of bad feeling generated by the saints in Utah towards Emma. And that's one strand of that bad feeling towards Emma. The gentleman on the right is Reynolds Cahoon. I wasn't able to find a picture of the other guy, Hyrum Kimball. So that pretty much brings us to the end. As we know, Joseph Smith did come back. He and Hyrum go to Carthage, and the next day they are slaughtered or killed. They're murdered in the Carthage jail. And we'll pick the narrative up in part 4 and tell the story about Emma, about what happened to Emma after that. So please join me for part 4 coming up soon. If you missed out on 1 and 2, you can go back to Church History Insights and Questions on the YouTube channel and pick up on them. And if you have any questions, please email them to me. You've got the email address here on this slide. It's CHIQ1830@gmail.com. If you haven't subscribed, liked, or shared before, please feel free to do so, and we'll look forward to being with you on the next one. Thanks very much.